Well, as we kick off the discussion today, I think the salient points that we all understand is online piracy has to be stopped in a new age. We support that. I think that's a broad coalition of people who know that we have to find the right answers. If there were one pirate in each foreign country, they had a physical location and a series of bank accounts, we wouldn't be here today. The likelihood is that online piracy will look to the American public exactly the way spam looks if you open an email account and sign up for everything, and you suddenly find that there are thousands or hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of opportunities for you to receive unwanted email. The same is true of piracy. The proliferation of a location is not one location for somebody who is stealing other people's intellectual properties. It can be in hundreds of countries or dozens of countries. It can have hundreds of sites, and it can move sites every day. So as we begin offering a viable alternative to the SOPA bill, this coalition that's being formed wants to make sure that there is a flexible, knowledgeable base within the federal government able to work freely with all of the interested parties, not just the holders of intellectual property, but quite frankly, those who have to make the internet run on time. We all understand that we want search engines to find things. We also understand that we want to make sure that what they find is free of Trojans, just as much as it's free of other people's property. Getting that right is something that we're going to be discussing here and in the months to come. There is a proposed piece of legislation. We don't believe in its current form that it begins to address it in the kind of flexible and knowledgeable way it needs to. More importantly, it has unintended consequences, as any 80-page bill seems to have in its first iteration. Doesn't mean that any one of us has the right solution. It means that we have to prepare for the assumption that you would have 1,000 cases pending or 1,000 cases that were under various levels of injunctions. You're not going to fix 1,000 things with a federal judge or the Department of Justice. And I think that's one of the important points that when we began looking, as we hopefully do here more often, with the scenarios of what likely will happen. And you start looking at when you try to play whack-a-mole with follow the money related to foreign sellers of people's intellectual property, what you discover is they're going to not pop up just in another place. They're going to pop up in hundreds or thousands of other places. That's the reason we believe that the thoughtful way to attack piracy with a combination of public and private efforts is going to have to be considerably different than the current bill that, quite frankly, looks like a typical anti-piracy bill having to do with customs bringing product into the United States. These are not physical products being delivered into ports, and they are not going to have 1 penny of loss to the seller if they fail to occur. And this, if all of you in this room, and if undoubtedly as all of us here, have received that letter from Nigeria or someplace saying that we've got money to give and if you'll just send us your bank account, no, that system doesn't work 99.9% of the time. But the internet has made it possible to send 1 million of those out, and it only has to work once or twice to be profitable. We know that's the same with piracy, and we want to have a system that allows all of us to work together to prevent the pirates from succeeding financially, at least if not once, certainly not a second time.
It's not every day that Darrell Issa and I see things exactly the same way, but this is one where we do. We've had an explosion of innovation and creativity in the internet space, and part of the reason why is the basic legal infrastructure that allowed that innovation to occur. A basic tenet is that the platforms and the pipes don't have responsibility for the content that others put in them. If you're on the telephone, AT&T is not responsible for your conversation. Once there's a notice of a problem, then you have an obligation to act. That important principle would be put at risk if this bill were adopted, and the implications for our economy, for job creation, for innovation, would be dire. So I am very happy to work with so many nonprofit groups, good government associations, Darrell Issa, and across the aisle to make sure that this mistaken effort to protect content does not destroy technology. Now, having said that, there is a piracy problem, and we have an obligation to pay attention to that. I am, in working with other members, we're trying to put together an alternative that will actually work. Follow the money. When WikiLeaks was active, there were efforts to try and keep that website from being accessed or existing, and those efforts completely failed. WikiLeaks kept popping up everywhere. It wasn't until the money was not available that WikiLeaks went down. Online poker is not lawful in the United States, and the efforts to shut down those websites simply didn't work. As soon as those websites were cut off, they were all over everywhere on the internet. But when you could not process the credit cards to make a bet, that was curtains for online poker. I think we can take a look at that model, make sure that due process elements are in place, but give real relief to people who have legitimate complaints about piracy. And I hope that we can do that in a bipartisan basis. With that, I just want to give thanks to the advocacy of people who care about the internet and the future of the internet. Thank you very much.
Even though I spoke earlier, I'm going to take the moment to speak on behalf of the old people that predate the electricity and fire, because Jack Valenti is no longer with us. But when he was with us, he proudly talked, and Michael remembers this, about how great it was to have lost the Sony Betamax case. How, in fact, industries would not have been formed. There'd be no DVD today. There'd been no videotape recorders. And if they had succeeded in trying to outright stop legal use, and without the assistance of the court, they wouldn't have. And it's that sort of recognition that you steer innovation, you regulate the protection, but at the same time, you recognize that stopping innovation, or assuming that protecting one requires that you stop another outright, has been a fallacy in attempt after attempt. So it's sort of remembering that, in fact, finding a way to follow the money to, in fact, protect intellectual property should not get in the way of, let's just assume that eBay has 100 million possible things you can buy, and 0.1% are being sold by people who are, in fact, absconding with somebody's intellectual property. You could end up under this bill taking down the entire eBay, and it would be, and you can imagine the excess self-regulation that would occur in order to try to drive that number from 99.9% pure to 99.9999999% pure, out of pure fear that this wonderful global enterprise would be taken down. So we could go through each of the search engines and so many others, but it is one of those things where I understand the internet because I grew up both in the military and then civilian life, seeing what it can do. I also understand that the tools that will be created to help protect against unlawful copyright and so on are going to be just as powerful, and we can help facilitate that even in Congress. If we work together on an alternative approach that we think can be had